Hi, this is Ms. Lick, and in this presentation we're going to be learning about how to compare and contrast. Now these are important skills because comparing and contrasting is a form of critical thinking. It allows us to analyze things and look at how they're the same and how they're different so that we can see them beyond just the surface level. The picture you see on this slide is a Venn diagram, which is a way to organize your thoughts when you're comparing and contrasting, and we'll learn about that later on in the presentation. But first we need to learn about the words themselves and what they mean. Now, comparing is when you ask, how are two different things alike, or how are they similar? And this can be a little bit confusing because both the words compare and contrast look a little bit alike, but to help you remember which is which, think of compare like the word pair, as in two things that are the same. And when you think about two things that are the same, you can think about these two pairs because they're alike, they're similar, and so it's easy to compare them because of how much they are the same. And so comparing is all about similarities. When we compare, we use a lot of words, of vocabulary words that just give us a clue of what we're doing. And these are words like alike or like, same as, similar, likewise, both, also and to, and as well as. You can see in all of these words kind of a theme of talking about things being the same and similar. And so those are the words that we use when we compare because that's what we're looking for. We're looking for similarity. Now, if someone were to show you these two dresses, dress 1 and dress 2, and told you to compare them, you could use some of these words in your comparisons. For example, I could say both dress 1 and dress 2 are dark colored. In that case, I use the word both and the word and, both of which are comparing words. Another thing I could say about these dresses is dress 1 has a stripe on the skirt. Likewise, dress 2 also has a stripe on the skirt. In that example, I used both the word likewise and the word also. So all of these words are words used when comparing. So if I told you, compare dress 1 and dress 2, you would think to yourself, how are they alike? So what makes them similar? And you might say something like, they both have red on them. In that sentence, both is one of our comparing words. You could also say, their shapes are similar, and similar is a comparing word. And then you could also say, dress 1 is sleeveless, dress 2 is sleeveless too. And this too is another comparing word. All of these words show that what we're talking about is a quality that both dresses have, which they share, and they are similar. Contrasting is a little bit different. And when you contrast, you think about the question, how are the two things different? What makes them different from each other? And because, like I said, the words compare and contrast themselves look kind of the same, when you think about contrast, look at the first part of the word. It says contra. And contra is a prefix that means different. So you might have heard the word contradict. When you contradict someone, you are saying something that disagrees with someone else or with something that someone else said. Contradiction is all about not being the same, about disagreement. And the picture on this slide is an example of that. We see the word no here in big letters, but if you look at the letters themselves, every letter is made up of lots of little words of yes. So in this picture, it says no and yes, so it actually contradicts itself. And so that can help remind us that when we are contrasting, we think contra, and we think, how are they different? So like we have words for comparing, we also have different words for contrasting. And these words, like I said, are clues of how we know that we're talking about differences instead of similarities. So some words, but for example, are unlike, different from, more than or less than, as opposed to, in contrast to, on the other hand, whereas, however, and but. And all of these words have some idea in them already of disagreement or of being different. And that is how we know that they're contrasting words. So if you had these two cars, car 1 and car 2, and I were contrasting them, I would use these words. I might say, both are cars, however, they are different sizes. And in that case, I used however, and I used different, both of which are contrasting words. I could also say car 1 is new. In contrast, car 2 is older. And in that example, in contrast is my contrasting word. So someone might tell you something like this, contrast car 1 and car 2. And so that means you have to think to yourself, how are they different? Contrasting and comparing are not the same thing. So contrasting is about differences. So you might say, car 2 has more room than car 1. And that's a difference between them. You use the word more than to show that it's contrasting. You could also say car 1 is black, whereas car 2 is silver. And whereas is your contrasting word in this example. Or you could say car 1 is a hatchback car, as opposed to car 2, which is a minivan. And in that sentence, as opposed to is your contrasting phrase that shows that you are talking about differences, not similarities. So as I mentioned before, a Venn diagram is a useful tool to use when comparing and contrasting. And it looks like this. It has two big circles, but they overlap so that some of the parts of the circles are actually the same. And in that middle part, the overlapping part, that is where we compare. So we list the similarities there because both circles are touching them. And each circle actually stands for a thing that you're comparing and contrasting. You could compare any two things or contrast any two things, but they just have to be labeled. You could put thing 1, all of its descriptions would be in the left circle, and thing 2 would be the right circle. And so what thing 1 and thing 2 have in common would be in the middle where it says same. And what they have different from each other, what is contrasted between them, would be on the other part of the circles. So thing 1 would be on the left and thing 2 would be on the right. So the Venn diagram allows us to both compare and contrast and show it on paper very visually and easy to understand. So for example, someone could give you this question, compare and contrast cows and pigs. So the first thing you want to do is you draw your Venn diagram. So you draw two circles and then you label the circles. So the first circle, thing 1, is cows, and the second one, thing 2, is pigs. And then you think to yourself the questions that we talked about. For comparing, you think about how are cows and pigs similar? How are they alike? And those answers you'll put in the middle between these two circles. And when you contrast, you think about how are cows and pigs different? What makes them different from each other? And those answers you'll put separately in the outside big part of the circles. So I have some examples written down here, and you can see the similarities in the middle. Both cows and pigs are mammals. They both live on farms. They both have hooves, and they're both big and heavy animals. But they're also different, so we can contrast them, and we see that cows eat plants, but pigs eat anything. Cows have horns, and pigs don't. Cows have 4 stomachs, and pigs have 1 stomach. Cows have udders, and pigs don't. Cows are tall, and pigs are low to the ground. Cows make beef and steak, and pigs make pork and ham and bacon. So those are some similarities and differences between cows and pigs. We see the similarities or the comparisons in the middle where we compared, and we see the differences in the rest, the outside parts of the circle where we contrasted. So hopefully that helps you understand how to compare and contrast. And remember, you can use a Venn diagram for any two things that you're comparing and contrasting.